Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it. I was never the kind of man who welcomed surprises. My life ran on precision, discipline, and routine. As the CEO of Pierce Construction, I built skyscrapers, not fairy tales. Structure was everything to my business, my home, and most importantly, my son, Teddy. That was why, when the front door swung open at precisely 7:02 p.m., I expected the new tutor babysitter to be the prim, no-nonsense professional I had envisioned. Instead, Stephanie Coleman breezed in with a bright yellow umbrella, soaked to the bone from the sudden downpour outside. Her auburn hair clung to her face, and her green eyes sparkled with amusement as she shook raindrops from her coat right onto my polished hardwood floor. "Sorry, Mr. Pierce," she said, flashing a sheepish smile. I didn't return her smile. "You're late." By 2 minutes, she corrected, shrugging off her wet jacket and hanging it neatly on the coat rack. "But I promise I make up for it with enthusiasm." I exhaled sharply, already regretting my choice. I had interviewed 10 candidates for this position. Every single one had been qualified, strict, and professional, except her. Stephanie had been different, unorthodox, and entirely too warm. But Teddy had taken one look at her during the interview and grinned, something he hadn't done in a long time. That alone had made me reconsider. Now, watching her stand there, dripping onto my pristine floors, I wondered if I had made a mistake. Before I could reply, a small figure darted past me. "Stephanie," Teddy cried, launching himself into her arms. She laughed, catching him with ease and spinning him once before setting him down. "Hey, buddy, ready for some fun?" I cleared my throat. "This is a structured environment, Miss Coleman. My son's education and discipline are not up for negotiation." She turned to me, arching a brow. "Of course not, Mr. Pierce. But learning doesn't have to feel like a prison sentence." I stiffened at her tone. "This trial period will last 2 weeks. If I feel your methods are ineffective, we will terminate your contract immediately." Her smile didn't falter. "Understood. But I have a feeling Teddy and I are going to do just fine." Teddy beamed, his little fingers wrapped around hers. 5 years ago, I lost my wife in a car accident. One moment she was there, laughing, teasing me about my tie, and the next she was gone. The news shattered me, but it was Teddy who suffered the most. He was only 3, too young to understand why his mother never came home. Since then, I've done everything I could to be both parents to him, to fill the void she left behind. But no matter how hard I tried, there were things I couldn't give him: a mother's warmth, her gentle touch, the softness in her voice when she soothed him to sleep. Teddy had been deprived of that love for 5 long years. And now, watching him cling to Stephanie, I realized just how much he had been missing. "Can we read tonight, Stephanie?" "Of course." But first, she knelt beside him, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "How about we build a reading fort?" His eyes widened. "A fort?" I frowned. "That sounds like unnecessary mess." "It's an interactive learning environment," she interjected, meeting my gaze head on. "It helps children engage with stories on a deeper level." Teddy turned to me, hopeful. I sighed, rubbing my temple. "Fine, but no chaos." Stephanie grinned. "Got it. No chaos. Just a little adventure." As they disappeared into the living room, dragging pillows and blankets, I remained rooted in place, watching them. And for the first time in years, I wasn't entirely sure I minded. I believed in discipline, order, efficiency. Stephanie Coleman, on the other hand, seemed to thrive in chaos. The next morning, as I descended the grand staircase with my coffee in hand, I expected to find Teddy at the dining table, quietly working through the structured assignments I had prepared for him. Instead, I found my once immaculate living room transformed into what could only be described as an indoor jungle. Blankets draped over furniture, books stacked into makeshift mountains, and Teddy, my son, who had always struggled to show enthusiasm for learning, was sprawled across the floor, completely engrossed in a book, while Stephanie sat beside him, animatedly acting out the scene. "What?" I said, my voice sharp as a blade. "Is going on here?" Stephanie looked up, entirely unbothered by my presence. "Good morning, Mr. Pierce. We're in the middle of an adventure. Teddy's exploring a lost city." Teddy lifted his head, grinning. It's called learning through imagination, Dad. My grip tightened around my coffee mug. Learning is done at a desk, with structure, not this. I gestured at the chaos surrounding them. Stephanie stood, brushing off her jeans. Actually, studies show that interactive learning helps children retain information better. I don't care about studies, I snapped. I care about results, and results require discipline, not playtime. Her green eyes locked onto mine, undeterred. And yet, in one morning, Teddy has already finished 2 chapters of his reading assignment and understood the core concepts without struggling. I glanced at my son, who nodded enthusiastically. I didn't even realize I was learning, Dad. It was fun. That word, fun, had no place in education. I ran a company built on precision. I didn't believe in distractions, and yet, here was Stephanie, undoing the structure I had so carefully put in place. I exhaled slowly, reining in my frustration. This trial period is not an excuse to ignore my rules, Miss Coleman. If you want to remain employed, you will teach my way. She crossed her arms, unshaken. I agreed to a trial, Mr. Pierce, not servitude. You hired me because you saw something lacking in Teddy's education. If you want me to be a mindless disciplinarian, then I'm not the right person for this job. A challenge. No one ever dared to challenge me. The room was silent, Teddy looking between us with wide eyes. Finally, I sighed. 2 weeks. You have 2 weeks to prove to me that your methods work. If I don't see significant improvement, you're gone. Stephanie smiled victorious. Deal. All I knew was that this woman had already disrupted my carefully constructed life, and the battle between us had only just begun. For days, I watched in silence as Stephanie continued her unorthodox approach. Teddy flourished under her guidance. His laughter filled the house, his eyes sparkled with curiosity, but I refused to accept that chaos could replace discipline. One evening, as I entered the study, I found Stephanie and Teddy sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by math problems scribbled onto colorful flashcards. Instead of concentrating, Teddy was laughing as Stephanie used exaggerated voices to explain fractions. This is ridiculous, I said, my patience snapping. Math isn't a circus act, Miss Coleman. Stephanie met my glare, unfazed. And yet, he just solved a problem he struggled with for weeks. Go ahead, Teddy. Show your dad. Teddy beamed. Dad, did you know that 3/4 of a pizza is basically saying 3 out of 4 slices? It's like thinking about real things instead of just numbers. I clenched my jaw. I wanted results, but I wasn't willing to sacrifice control to get them. You may think you're helping, I said coldly, but this is not how I want my son raised. I won't have him growing up believing that life is all fun and games. Stephanie's smile faded. No, Mr. Pierce. You won't have him growing up at all if you keep suffocating him. My hands curled into fists. Enough. You've crossed the line. A tense silence settled between us. Then Stephanie stood. If you really think I'm the problem, then maybe this trial should end now. Teddy's face fell. No. I hesitated. For a moment, I saw something in Teddy's desperate eyes. A fear of returning to the cold, rigid world I had built for him. Stephanie sighed, gathering the flashcards. I'll be here in the morning. If you still want me gone, I'll leave. She walked past me without another word. I remained standing in the dim room, fists clenched, heart pounding. Morning arrived, thick with an uneasy stillness. My maid Marie came up to me. Sir, I didn't want to say anything before, but I saw Miss Coleman in your late wife's room. She was holding the diamond brooch from the jewelry box. I rushed into the room, opened the jewelry box, but the brooch was gone. Stephanie had already overstepped by embedding herself too deeply in our lives. But this was betrayal. At precisely 9, Stephanie entered, her expression unreadable. She stood in the doorway, hands clasped, waiting. Well, she asked. Teddy peeked from behind her, his eyes pleading. I inhaled sharply, my decision weighing on me like a stone. I'm suspending you, effective immediately. Confusion flickered in her eyes. What? Why? I exhaled sharply. Marie saw you take something that didn't belong to you. Her face paled. You think I stole from you? Teddy tugged at my sleeve. Daddy, no, she wouldn't. I ignored the ache in my chest. Leave Stephanie. Teddy's voice broke. Dad, please don't do this. He grabbed her hand, clinging to her like a lifeline. I'll do better. I'll study your way, I promise. Just don't make her go. Guilt clawed at my chest, but I forced myself to remain firm. Go to your room, Teddy. Teddy's eyes filled with betrayal before he turned and ran. Stephanie let out a slow breath. You're making a mistake. For the first time, she didn't argue. She just turned, her shoulders trembling, and walked out the door. And with that, the house fell into hollow silence. The house felt different without Stephanie's laughter filling its corners. Teddy had barely spoken since she left, his meals untouched, his eyes downcast, but I forced myself to believe I had made the right decision. Days passed in a blur of silence. Teddy refused to speak to me, his once bright eyes dulled by heartbreak. Guilt gnawed at me, but I buried it beneath routine, until the truth shattered everything. Then, late one evening, I found Marie in the study, hurriedly stuffing something into her apron. Marie? My voice was sharp, demanding. She startled, and something clattered to the floor. My breath caught. The diamond brooch, my wife's brooch. The realization struck me like a fist. You lied. Marie stammered, but I had heard enough. You're fired. Get out. The next morning, I stood outside Stephanie's door. When she opened it, her eyes were guarded, wounded. I was wrong, I said, my voice thick with regret. Marie was the thief. I should have trusted you. Night, a desperate cry jolted me awake. Teddy lay burning with fever, his small body trembling. Panic tightened around my chest. Teddy, stay with me, son. Frantic, I grabbed my phone. There was only one person I trusted now. Stephanie answered after the second ring. Franklin? Please, Teddy needs you. Minutes later, she arrived, her presence bringing a warmth I hadn't realized I craved. She rushed to Teddy's side, her touch gentle, her voice soothing. As I watched her, something inside me cracked. I had fought against her, against change, against what she had brought into our lives. But the truth was undeniable. A month later, I stood before her, heart in my throat. Stephanie, I love you. Her breath hitched, tears glistening in her eyes. A week after that, I knelt before her, a ring in my hand. Marry me. This time, she didn't hesitate. Yes. And just like that, the silence that had haunted my home was replaced, forever, with laughter, love, and the family we had both been missing all along. Friends, what do you think of this story? Write your opinion in the comments. Would you like more stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button so you don't miss any videos. See you tomorrow.